So some of these parts are very similar. If you look at the narrow slat, the wide slat, the convex slat, and the concave slat, they're all 17.5 inches long. Their widths may vary a little bit, but let's go ahead and for our first steps here, let's see if we can make these parts right here. So there's 2, 4, 6, 8 parts. We're going to start off, we're going to rough to length over on the miter saw. We know the finished length is supposed to be 17.5, so we can rough them out to about 19.5. So we're going to need multiple boards roughed out to 19.5. Each board needs to get one edge jointed, so we'll joint the edge. Then we're going to head over to the table saw, and we need to rip 6 boards to 3.5 inches wide and 2 boards to 1 3/4 inches wide. Then what we're going to do, we head over to the miter saw and we make what I call a sliver cut. So we just take a teeny tiny bit off of one end so that we know that the end is 90 degrees to the edges. And then we can finish them to length on the miter saw. So right over at the miter saw again, we can finish them to length. Don't forget, their finished length is supposed to be 17.5. 17.5 for all those. And so just looking at our next steps for these pieces, it says layout. Well, the narrow slat and the wide slat, there's no layout work required. They're just rectangles. So I'm going to do this. I'm just going to put an X through here, an X through here, maybe on maybe in Google Sheets. What we can do is just we'll color this in gray. So we'll just blank that section out. So the convex slat and the concave slat, we do need to do some layout work. There's some curves that we're going to need in there. So we're going to say yes. All right, so laying out the curves is really easy because I gave you a template, and we're just going to go ahead and we're going to trace the template. The hard part is finding the template. So here's where I have the templates hidden. So now that we've found our templates, don't forget we've got 2 boards like this that are reserved for the convex slat, 2 boards like this reserved for the concave slat. Here's our template. With the template, you line the template up with what I call the blank, the stock that we've already ripped and squared up to the proper dimension, and we just go ahead and we trace the template. Keeping in mind that hole is there just to hang it up, so we don't need to trace that hole. So we've got our concave. Now we'll use the convex. We just trace it. So we're going to need 2 of these and 2 of those. And what we're going to do now is we're going to head over to the bandsaw and we're going to cut this curve, this profile, out on the bandsaw. Now when we go over to the bandsaw, we don't want to cut right on the line. This is the part we keep. This is the scrap part. This is the part we keep. This is the scrap. We don't want to cut on the line. So what we want to do is we want to cut just to the outside of the line. So out here is the outside. And so what happens here is I'm going to use the bandsaw and I'm going to cut right about here. So we don't want to touch the line. If you start touching the line, you stop and you back up. We don't want to touch the line. what we're going to do is we cut to the outside of the line, and then after that we're going to sand to the line. So we'll go over to the bandsaw and check it out. So again, we're going to cut to the outside of the line. So for the two convex slats, we need to sand this outside curve. The belt sander is the perfect tool. We're going to keep our stock flat on the table, and we just keep the piece moving, and you'll roll it right through that sandpaper, and we're going to sand to the line. So we want just a little bit of the line left. Very difficult to see, but there is a little pencil mark still left there. So that works great for the two convex slats. For the two concave slats, we're going to need the spindle sander. Same process. We're only sanding the inside curve. Spindle sander, again, flat on the table, and we just keep your piece moving back and forth. Again, I sanded right up to the line so you can still see a little bit of that pencil line still left. Now the next steps for the narrow slats, the wide slats, the convex slats, and the concave slats is to router the top edges. When we did the cutting board, what we did is we used a handheld router. This time we're going to use the router table. I think you're going to find this much easier. The router table simply has a handheld router up underneath the table. So just like the cutting board, we have to do the end grain first. So I've got a wide slat. We come over. We're going to do the end grain first. So what's going to happen is we're just going to run this flat on the table up against the fence. So we just run this through here like this. We're going to flip it around. We're going to do the other end grain first. Just run it through here. And then we're going to do the edge grain. Just run it through here. The other edge grain. Just run it. Your fingers should never go underneath this orange guard. Another thing we need to be concerned about when we do the end grain is tear out. When we finish, the wood fibers right here, there's nothing supporting it. They're going to want to tear out on us. So what we're going to do is we're going to artificially support it. What we're going to do is we're going to take a scrap piece of lumber. All right, so you can see this is something that's just laying around. Scrap piece of lumber. I'm going to push on this piece to support the wood fibers in this piece. It's hard to see the results, but what we did is we put a nice little chamfered edge all the way around all the edges on the top face of the board. We're not going to do the bottom. We just go ahead and we do the top. So we're going to do that for the wide slats. We're going to do that for the narrow slats. We're going to do it for the convex slats. When we start with the convex slat, it's a little difficult here to support the end grain because we'd have to match that curve. So on this side, I can't support the end grain. When I flip it around to the other side, the other end, I can. One end grain, second end grain, I did my long edge, and then I did this curve. So you notice when I did the curve, I just kept it up against the fence, pushed it right up against the fence, right in the center, and I was able to accomplish that, no problem. The concave slat is a little more difficult. What we're going to do is we'll do one end, we'll do the second end, we'll do the edge, and we also want to do this, but the current setup's not going to let us do that. So when you're ready to chamfer, router this edge, come and get me. I'll change the setup and I will help you with that part. The next step would be to rough sand, then medium sand, and then fine sand. So let's look at what we accomplished today for the narrow, wide slats, the convex, and the concave slats. We made our blanks, we squared up our stock, finished it to 17.5. We've got our convex and concave layout templates. And what we did is we cut the profile on the bandsaw. We did that, yes, for the concave and the convex. And we skipped it for the narrow and the wide. And like I said, on your spreadsheets, what we'll do is we'll just gray that in. We didn't have to sand the profile on the narrow and wide, but we did have to sand the profile on the convex and the concave. And then what we did is we routed the edges on all 8 of those parts. So I'm going to say yes, 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 and yes. In my column for rough, medium, and fine sand, RMF is not here on here, but of course everything's going to get sanded, so that's going to be a yes, and a yes for those 8 parts.